The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation. Founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello, this is Morgan Halgren. For 16 seasons, Living in Iowa told the tale of what it means to be uniquely Iowan. Tonight, we honor that spirit by bringing you another glimpse into our rich heritage with a few stories from our archives. In this episode of The Best of Living in Iowa, we'll remember Iowa artist and sculptor Isabel Bloom, follow the work of Dyersville woodcarver Jack Becker, and we visit the world of poet Joseph Langland. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the best of living in Iowa.
Basically, her style throughout all of it, although there'll be differences, is very simple and straightforward, to the point, less is more, say it as simply as possible.
She said she wanted more people to be able to afford nice art.
Davenport artist Isabel Bloom's career spanned many disciplines: artist, mother, teacher, businesswoman, performer, and traveler. A student and friend of Grant Wood, she created her own definition of the regionalist style. Obsessed with Russian art, she pressed its ideas into her forms. A pioneer of both technique and industry, her sculpture made her a Quad Cities icon. Isabel Bloom biographer Amy Bauer.
The reason why the artwork kind of caught on, I think, is the subjects, the children being kind of garden pieces. There's something about the concrete material and the Midwest, and just it's a solid, honest, simple kind of art form.
A lifelong resident of Davenport, Isabel Scherer grew up playing in the mud of the Mississippi. Her first sculpture was fired in the family furnace, much to her father's annoyance.
One of the things that she liked to talk about a lot was Stone City. That made such an impression on her. I mean, she was a young woman. She loved Grant Wood. He encouraged everyone at the colony to experiment, to find your own way to do things, which is what she needed and what she wanted to do.
In 1932, at the age of 24, Isabel spent 2 weeks studying painting and sculpting at Grant Wood's Artists Colony in Stone City. The colony was intended as a place for Midwestern artists to develop the regionalist style Wood championed. 90 students spent 6 weeks living, creating, and sharing ideas at the colony. The experience would solidify Isabel's career as an artist and introduce her to her future husband, DeWitt muralist John Bloom. Over time, Isabel Bloom experimented with technique and materials, glazes and finishes, and forms. With bronze too expensive for reproductions, she gravitated toward cheap and durable concrete, which is easily formed and molded when wet, yet can be sculpted like stone when hard. The choice of concrete also ensured the affordability of Bloom's pieces. After mixing countless batches by hand in her basement studio, Isabel graduated to an electric mixer as sales increased. The low cost and simple lines of her stylized figures were well received by the public, and the public's love for the artist soon became as important as its love for her art.
One of her first employees told me she was just kind of a wonder to watch, and she'd be working on her artwork, and then a customer would come in, and she was just so gracious and so friendly, and so I think a lot of the people would come back because she was just such a wonderful person to know. And
Isabel was a real likable person, and I think she just had this neat, quaint little shop that you could walk into, and she had her sign open by chance or by appointment.
As she became more well-known, Isabel's work slowly shifted from individual commissioned works to the reproductions of her playful figures. She developed molding techniques to reproduce her art more easily, and dyeing and whiting recipes to achieve the weathered bronze patina she admired. The public responded. By 1979, it took 5 artists to keep up with increasing sales. but the business side of the operation began requiring more of her time than Isabel was willing to give. In 1981, at her suggestion, 4 longtime customers bought the company and formed Isabel Bloom Limited. In 1995, 3 local businessmen purchased the company, and today 200 artisans work on creating Isabel Bloom's art.
She just has a very good feel for dimension and proportion in the human form, and a very good feel for simplifying what she sees and leaving out the detail that's not necessary. So her pieces are very compact and simple and rounded, saying it, if you were a painter, in as few strokes as possible.
After 10 years of assisting Isabel in the completion of her projects, Donna Young took over the duties of creating new work for the Bloom companies. Designing additions for the catalog that will be familiar to buyers, yet identifiable as Donna's work, has been an easy transition.
I have no intentions of trying to be exactly like Isabel, and no artist would want to do that. You know, she's Isabel, I'm Donna. Even though I'm sculpting for the company, the customer who's bought from us will know that this is an Isabel Bloom piece and this is a Donna Young.
Bloom's simple lines convey the stylized world of an artist's mind, the ability to reduce a complex memory to its barest idea.
She said a lot of times she didn't know what it was going to look like when she started. She'd just start working and just work on it until it was what she wanted.
Quad City Times columnist Bill Wundram first met the Blooms in the 1950s.
Now, we always think of an artist or a sculptor as sort of a dour type that sits in a grim room or a cabin someplace, meditating, carving, molding. But Isabel was a marvelously fun person. And I recall one time meeting her at the fair, and she said, "Billy, let's go on the Ferris wheel." She thought it was so wonderful that when it was time to get off, she would give the guy another $2. Let's go around again. We kept going around and around and around, and she was laughing and giggling and having a wonderful time. I was getting sick to my stomach.
For 4 years, Isabel hosted a children's television show that taught an art lesson each day.
Isabel loved kids, taught with kids, brought out the best in them, and she would just be beaming. And I could tell that she had been with kids, because she said, "Kids give me life. They lift me."
Children and animals were Isabel's most common subjects for her art, and her youthful enthusiasm emanates from her figures. Each year, thousands are given as gifts or cherished as collectibles. A small army of workers hand finishes each piece, extending Isabel's vision beyond her death in 2001 at age 93.
I think her life was important because not just of her artwork, but because of her spirit and the way she went about. She wasn't afraid to try new things. She wasn't afraid to experiment. You know, back in the 30s and 40s when women just pretty much stayed home and raised their family, Isabel raised her family. She did all the cooking and sewing, and she ran a cement mixer and lifted 50-pound bags of concrete. You know, she definitely was a pioneer spirit that we could all learn lots from.
A most familiar sight for the folks who call Dyersville home is a wood carving by local artist Jack Becker. And since his statues grace the varied confines of hospital, church, and cemetery chapel, you could say that Jack's art greets 'em coming and going.
Wood and I get along real well. They call me nature's artist. It's taking raw material from the earth and developing it into a thing of beauty. When you're done, there's never two pieces alike.
Jack Becker has been interpreting the forests of northeast Iowa for the past 30 years.
The apostles are carved out of American chestnut, which is a rare wood now that died in the 30s, like the elm died in the 70s. And we ran out of wood for Christ, so we made him out of butternut. And he's just a little different color, but yet he blends in there well. When we carved the figure of Judas, right about in the midsection there was a bad spot in there, and that just happened to be that way, but we always remarked that, of course, here's Judas. He's less than perfect. He's got a bad spot of wood in there. Each individual piece has a story behind it. You can kind of mark your life with a lot of it.
Jack's work has become something his Dyersville neighbors mark their lives with, too. In fact, some even say that they know they're home when they see a Jack Becker wood carving. There's the hospital's statue of the Blessed Virgin and Beckman High School's St. Joseph, the patron saint of woodworkers. Jack also carved the basilica's namesake, Francis Xavier, and the cemetery chapel's statue of Mary and John leaving the tomb of Jesus. Even a likeness of the town's founder has been preserved in wood.
I love the sculpture so much that it's hard to even give the pieces up that are commissioned, but you have to, for of course, to make a living.
Over the years, Jack's become attached to so many of his creations that the museum he built for them is literally bursting at the ceiling. The mere volume is quite astonishing, especially when you consider that for nearly all his wood carving years, Jack's been fighting an affliction that has left him just barely mobile, even with the help of crutches.
I've had arthritis over the years, and I've kind of learned to deal with it, to adapt with it. You got to be flexible. You got to be flexible like a rubber band.
Jack is hewn from Austrian stock. His great uncle was a woodcarver back in the old country, and Jack's father was a carpenter. But the family grain didn't start showing through for him until he'd done a little branching out. In the early 60s, the Night Riders, with 20-year-old Jack Becker on guitar, played the rounds of teen dances in Wisconsin, Illinois, and northeast Iowa.
Everybody used to give me a hard time about that I had the guitar in the back seat, but not the girl. I said, well, that didn't bother me because I was doing what I wanted to do.
The mid-60s turned out to be the end of the road for the Night Riders. Jack tried his hand at cartooning for a while, but as this strip shows, maybe his characters were trying to tell him something. The message got through to him loud and clear, though, during a visit to the famous Beeley Clock Museum in Spillville.
I've always had an interest in art, even ever since I was a younger child in grade school. I used to draw on the blackboard. I'd be probably drawing Revolutionary War soldiers rather than figuring my numbers. After I saw clocks at Spillville, I converted into wood after that.
Wood carving started out as a hobby for Jack, something to occupy his time on the farm between growing seasons.
It kind of grew into an occupation from a hobby. I've gotten so busy with the wood carving that I couldn't keep up the farming, and I decided that wood carving would be my life's occupation.
He's especially fond of his large clocks, like this one that commemorates the bicentennial.
That was carved from 76 to 82. Lots and lots of hard maple carved in it. If you know, hard maple is very hard to carve, but accepts detail extremely well, more than probably anything else on this earth. And then, of course, when we're finished, we put on a beeswax and tongue oil finish to get through the rich patina of the wood.
The figure of Joseph and Jesus that Jack's been sculpting will soon join a whole forest of characters in another of his major projects.
The clock of the Old Testament and the New Testament, it might be 5 or 10 years down the road if I can. Good Lord willing, I keep going that long while I'll complete this. And I've got parts of it done, but of course it's all scenes out of the Bible carved out of oak, ash, and butternut, and also a lot of individuals like Melchizedek, Isaac, Moses, and all these guys, Jacob, all these guys that are carved in the cathedrals of Europe in marble.
They say it's the extremely lucky person whose avocation turns into their vocation, the way it did for Jack. Along the way, though, he's certainly run into more than his share of bad luck.
I ran my hand through the table saw about 9 years ago, and It was a pretty bad injury. I completely shattered my thumb. I was growling at the nurses and the doctor and said, I got to get back at that wood carving. I got to finish that tiger. A successful and good doctor in Dubuque, he worked with me, and I developed my grasp back, but I didn't lose my grasp so I could continue my work. I had such a strong desire to get back at it that nothing was going to stop me, and nothing did. I've become more ambidextrous. I used to be extremely right-handed. So I guess I've been just kind of like, we go again, adapting to it like a rubber band.
When we first met Joseph Langland, we were struck by his reserved demeanor. But as he spoke, we saw that he was a wellspring of emotion and keen observations. After spending a whole afternoon with him, it's easy to understand why he has earned a permanent place in the mainstream of American poetry. If a day could be a poem, this would be the day. Tinted sky and neon grass framed our view of Highland Township, where we journeyed to meet Joseph Langland, a poet. Joseph grew up in these lush hills and still reflects upon this place.
Suddenly from a rocky spring, a trout hung trembling in the air, a jewel to the morning sun. And then upon the mossy banks, rainy with rainbows, up he leaped and tumbled wildly in the grass.
His sacrifice of a rainbow trout was inspired by these very waters.
And that was the supper that I had, while my imagination fed its silver hook upon this world.
The sounds and rhythms of Joseph's Norwegian-American heritage spring forth in his poems, sometimes inspiring him to song. He says the love of rhyme has run in his veins since childhood.
When I was a kid going to school, I used to hippity-hop to school, about upwards of a mile to Beacon Rural Schoolhouse. And I used to sing, and then I'd skip, hippity-hop, almost as fast as most people could run. I loved the nursery rhymes, songs, riddles, runes, all that kind of stuff. And so I, instead of writing prose, I started to write things, you know, in rhyme and meter and so forth.
Joseph is one of those fortunate few who can revisit the playgrounds of his youth.
Here, have some.
Thanks. For more than 60 years, he's been coming back to the family's Valley View farm, which is now run by his brother Walter. In his youth, a nearby limestone cave became Joseph's poet's den, where he'd scratch out verse by candlelight.
And I remember I got to the end of one poem about spring, and I wanted to express how I felt, and I didn't know how to do it. You know, I was just 9 years old. Yeah. And so the last word is ha, 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 ha. just to laugh, because I wanted to express, you know, the exaltation, and you don't know how. But looking back, I think, well, I had the right idea.
Over the course of his poetry career, Joseph has mingled with the finest poets of the century, including Robert Frost. As a young man, Joseph even encountered Grant Wood and did some aesthetically pleasing garden work for the Iowa artist. He grew up in an era of regionalism, and so has considered himself a poet of the Midwest, even though he's lived on both East and West coasts. Some of his early books, like The Wheel of Summer, tell of the joys and horrors of growing up on the farm.
I tell you, we saw an awful lot of death on the farm, and the people that don't grow up on the farm, they don't understand that the whole business of a farm, really, is to raise things and then cut them down.
In the Sacrifice poems, he even writes about his reactions to the necessary job of castrating pigs. Once, after Joseph recited this work in London, a gentleman told him, "This indeed was one of the finest poems ever written," on that particular subject.
Inherent in that, in those poems, is just simply the idea that all life is significant and precious, and sometimes it might be violent, and several times it might be very sad, but it's still significant.
About a mile from his childhood home, the tidy steeple of the Highland Lutheran Church brings up more meaningful memories for Joseph.
Oh, absolutely. I put part of the rhythms into some of my poems.
His parents are buried here, and so is his brother Harold Langland, who died in World War II at age 20. We asked Joseph to honor us with a reading of his poem about Harold, a poem which has been shared in more than 30 anthologies and translated into many languages. A poem simply titled War.
For Harold. When my young brother was killed by mute and dusty shell in the thorny brush, crowning the boulders of the Villa Verda trail, I laid my whole dry body down, dropping my face like a stone in a green park on the east banks of the Rhine. On an airstrip skirting the sun, his sergeant brother sat like a stick in his barracks, while cracks of fading sunlight caged the dusty air. And in the rocky, rolling hills west of the Mississippi, his father and mother sat in a simple Norwegian parlor with a photograph smiling between them on the table, and their hands fallen into their laps like sticks and dust. And still other brothers and sisters, linking their arms together, walked down the dusty road where once he ran, and into that deep green valley to sit on the stony banks of the stream he loved and let those murmuring waters wash over their blood-hot feet with a springing crown of tears.
Writing poetry for most of his 80 years, Joseph Langland has not lived in Iowa for more than 6 decades. But he keeps returning, one way or another, to the lands and waters of his childhood.
One of my favorite phrases is, "The past is your good luck, no matter what it has been." Because if you don't value your past, the future just has no foundation. I don't think I would have been a writer at all unless I had a strong, affectionate memory for all sorts of things that happened, including things that were genuinely sad.
The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.